Scriptural evidence for and against free will. The law and its commands. They go to great pains to assemble much evidence from Scripture, so that if they cannot prevail by means of better and more relevant texts than ours, they can at least overpower us by their quantity. It is as if a general were to gather a host of men who were unused to war, in order to terrify his enemy. Before they got down to work, they might put on a brave show. But if battle were joined and the enemy engaged, they would be routed at the first blow. It will thus be easy for us to overturn all their objections, which look good, but are no more than empty posturing. Now, because all the texts which they cite fall into various categories, we will group them in such a way that one answer will suffice for many more, making a point-by-point explanation unnecessary. A favorite bolt hole is God's commands, which they believe so nicely match our strengths that we are capable of doing all that they require. They, therefore, pile up very many of them and measure man's ability accordingly. Their argument runs like this: when God commands holiness, piety, obedience, chastity, love, and gentleness, and forbids filthiness, idolatry, immorality, anger, theft, pride, and so forth, either he is mocking us, or else he is only demanding what lies within our power. Now all the commands they bring together can be divided into three classes: those which summon man to turn back to God, those which simply enjoin observance of the law, and those which bid us continue in God's grace already given. Let us first discuss them overall, after which we will consider them class by class. I admit that it has long been a popular habit to measure man's abilities by God's commands, and that this has some semblance of reason. Nevertheless, I maintain that this is the result of great ignorance. Those who suggest that it would be quite absurd if God's commands were impossible to obey are using a much too feeble argument. Otherwise, they say, the law would have been given in vain. It is as if Paul had never said a word about the law. What, tell me, does he mean when he remarks that the law was given to increase transgressions, and that through the law comes knowledge of sin? Or when he says that the law begets sin, and that it came in to multiply sin? Does this mean that for the law not to have been given in vain, it had to be consistent with our own strength? On the contrary, Paul demonstrates in all these passages that God has commanded things beyond our powers to convict us of our own helplessness. Clearly, if Scripture taught only that the law is the rule of life by which our deeds are measured, I would agree readily and at once with their opinion. Since, however, it carefully explains the law's many different uses, we should heed Scripture's own account rather than our own fanciful ideas. Now, in this respect, the law no sooner lays down what we are to do than it reveals that the ability to obey comes from God's grace. That is why it teaches us to ask for it in prayer. If we had nothing but commands, without the word of promise, we would have to test our powers to see if they were adequate to the task. But since the commands are accompanied by promises which reveal not only that we need God's help to support us, but also that all our strength lies in His grace, they amply show that we are unable and quite unfit to keep the law. So let us abandon the idea that our strengths are proportionate to God's commands, as if God had adjusted His standard of righteousness to our weakness and littleness. Instead, let the promises teach us just how ill-prepared we are, seeing that always and everywhere we are in dire need of His grace. But who, they ask, will possibly be persuaded that God meant His law for mere blocks of wood and stones? To persuade anyone of that is not our intention, for the wicked are not mere stones or blocks of wood. When taught by the law that their evil desires are contrary to God, their very consciences convict them of their guilt. Nor, likewise, are believers, when made conscious of their weakness, they look to God's grace. Augustine's comments are most relevant here, as when he writes, God commands what we cannot do, so that we might know what we should ask of him. Again, God's precepts are most useful if we so esteem free will that God's grace has the greater honor. Faith obtains what the law commands. God indeed demands faith of us, but does not find what he demands unless he first puts within us what he intends to find. Let him give what he commands, and let him command whatever he wills.